All right, so I'm going to cover off on step three, which is evaluate and offer. So this will include driving by a property, and I would just specify that it is a drive-by. It's not drive to the property, park your car, get out, and walk around. A couple reasons for that. One, people might wonder what you're doing. And if the property is listed for sale, as an example, and the broker hears about you doing that, they're not going to be too happy about it. So don't do it. It's a drive-by. So don't pretend you're someone else. People on a regular basis, I don't know why people think it's totally okay just to flat out lie and would say, well, I'm here, I'm an insurance guy, and I'm looking at the property. And, when you're being asked by the property manager who you are, what you're doing, just don't do that. One, don't get out of your car. Two, don't lie. Look at as much of the property as you can. Drive through the entire property as much as you can, provided you can get through gates and things like that. And you're checking out different things, the curb appeal, that can be, easy to fix. Checking out other things. You might see pictures of a property, for example, in a offering memorandum from a broker. It looks pretty nice. Then you drive to the property and you're like, is this even the same property? It looks way worse than it does in the photos. But checking out the roofs as much as you can, just the exterior. Are you seeing you're seeing things that maybe cracks in foundation, cracks in, let's say it's brick. Does it need to be painted? If it has balconies, are they covered? Are they not covered? Are they wood? Are they steel? Those type of things. You're just checking out as much of the property as you possibly can. Flat roofs, is it mansard roofs? What type of roofs does it have? Does it have a big pitch? And again, you're not necessarily going to be able to tell condition exactly of the roof, especially if they're flat. But if they're not, but you get an idea. Some cases you go there, you can kind of see it looks pretty weathered, pretty old, things like that. Maybe there's some shingles missing. And then other things, you could do if there's like a gas station, just as an example, nearby. We bought properties where a gas station right next door to a property. You can just go in there and, maybe buy water or whatever you want to buy and just ask them, hey, what do you think about the property next door? And they'll tell you like, oh, it's a good property, it's quiet, or a lot of activity, a lot of crime, a lot of stuff going on there. It gives you a good idea as far as what the property is doing. Clientele coming through there and maybe the crime and stuff as well, as I mentioned. Maybe after you drive by the property, you're like, man, didn't really know the whole property needed to be painted. And then you might adjust your CapEx budget based on that. You could go at night, and I'm not saying this really just to scare people, but reality is, depending on where you're buying, it can be dangerous driving by at night. And I don't want to buy properties like that anymore, but we've owned a couple properties. And in fact, one of the guys in our coaching group, he drove by a property during the day, and I told him about, hey, drive by at night. And he was videotaping while he was driving. He's a couple minutes away from the property. And on the video, he's like, hey, Mark, I'm not stopping. It looks really rough there. A lot of stuff going on. I'm not even going to stop. So I'd be like, I wouldn't pursue that property personally. I'm not saying it's a bad investment or a bad deal, but I don't want to contend with properties like that. And if you think, well, fine, it's not operating very well and there's bad clientele. I mentioned before, it's very, very difficult to go into a property and change the mindset of people living there and the clientele and to make it safer. There are things you can do for all those, but it's tough and it takes a long time. And even at the end of the day, you still might not be successful in doing that. Are there a lot of cars in the parking lot? So you go down, to a property and you're driving through during the day and the property, has all the cars are filled, the spots are filled, tons of cars there. And you're just kind of going, people working or not? And now people do legitimately work from home more than they have before. So it could be busier, but you're like, people that are not working potentially or living there, and then you have to ask the question, are they living there on Section 8? Are they getting assistance? Things like that. Just a data point. What types of cars are there? As far as, are there cars there that are jacked up as far as, being worked on, which typically isn't allowed, but does happen. We've been at properties before where some cars have been on blocks, no tires on them, with no wheels, right, on them and things like that. So just keep in mind, as far as what the cars look like. I mean, they're newer cars, are they bunch of junky cars? It just gives you an idea of the clientele living there. These aren't necessarily all bad things, but I mean, all things being equal, I'd rather buy a property where people are out working on a regular basis, not getting subsidized. The cars that are there are a little bit nicer condition. There aren't cars there being worked on, things like that. And then just you get a vibe. I mean, right or wrong, you get a vibe, you meet somebody, you get a vibe when you go to a neighborhood, you get a vibe when you drive by an apartment complex and you see people outside. What are they doing? What do they look like? And be like, well, you shouldn't judge people the way they look. Okay, I get that. But reality is everyone judges people. Doesn't matter. It's reality. That's what happens. So you do get a vibe and a feel as far as, the type of people that are there, and what's going down. Been cases before where no joke, a couple of drug deals go down while we're there touring a property. So, you see that. Is it leasing office easy to find? The signage to point you to the leasing office. If there's not signage, either way, is the leasing office close to the front of the building? Is it way far in the back, hard to find? And if it is, could it be, easily moved closer to the front of the property? Yes or no? Things like that. So some things can be fixed, some things can't. Putting signage up, very easy. How do you make the leasing office, stand out? Ways to do that. Could it be even that the building's a different color and, signs and balloons and just different things like that. And then take notes, and it might not sound important, but in some cases we used to tour several properties in a day. And before started, really taking notes and really understanding which questions to ask while we're there, you get home and then I'd be like, I can't remember if that property was the thing that had the issue with the drainage or it was the other property, because you just get kind of deal merge. If you're looking at one deal, not probably a big deal, but you do want to take notes as you go. What can and cannot be changed? You can't change the location. You can't change, in some cases, you wouldn't typically say, I'm going to change all the flat roofs to pitch roofs. I mean, yes, it's possible to do that. Probably not financially viable to do that. If there are other just physical characteristics of the building, some cases the exterior, certain parts of the country have this, kind of exterior stucco looking exterior, but it's really bad, like really bad. It's like kind of junk, especially if it gets water and stuff behind it. Can you change that? You could. You could tear all that off and redo it, but you're talking, some cases probably hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. If it's right next to a gas station, can you change that? Probably not. And the thing with gas stations and other things like laundromats and even car washes, that the environmental impact increases when those, gas stations are right next to your property, and the lender might require you to do additional environmental checks and, inspections and things like that, which they'll charge you for. And then if they find something, you might not be able to get a loan on it, depending on what they find. So you drove by the property and you're like, you know what? Looks pretty good. Or no real big surprises, at least what I could see, driving through a property. There could be other surprises when you get in there, but so now I'm going to go ahead and submit a LOI or letter of intent. Uh, know the current market conditions. What I mean by that, if you're in a hot market and you're not willing to do what other potential buyers are willing to do, just as an example, will you put hard money down? Hard money meaning non-refundable, and that's relative. Non-refundable when? Is non-refundable when I sign a contract? Is it non-refundable after I get due diligence? Is it non-refundable after, I have a financing contingency or title issues that would make it refundable? Things like that. You might have to put money down like that. As far as duration, if you say, well, I want a 60-day due diligence period just to inspect, and then I want, two 60-day extension options. It's ridiculous, right? I mean, you're not competitive. As a seller, I'd be like, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. I don't want to do business with him. So this concept of buying a property, and if you want to say somewhat, I want to say duping a seller into doing something that is completely ridiculous. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's not very probable. And you need to understand what you need to do in order to be competitive. I mentioned the hard money, what it is, when it becomes hard. Typically, even if you say I have hard money day one, so let's say, for example, I put $200,000 earnest money and I say $75,000 out hard day one, which means as a buyer, if I walk away, I would lose that money. But not really, typically, meaning it's held by title, generally speaking. And if there are usually ways for me to get that money back, like if there are title issues, typically I would get that can't be resolved, I would typically get that back. If there are environmental issues where the lender won't loan, I'll usually get that back. If the seller defaults in whatever capacity, I would get the hard money back. So when you say hard money, now if you put my example, $200,000 earnest money and 75,000 that's hard, and the seller says I want the $75,000 released, when you sign the contract, not sure I would want to do that as a buyer. There are other things I just mentioned that could come up. So those are reasons why hard money typically would be uh, not hard anymore. You could try to get early access agreement. This would basically be, let's say, I'm going to be looking at a property to buy it, and before you can take a while sometimes to do contracts, and just depending on even the seller too and their attorney or attorneys, things like that. It just goes on and on. So you say, hey, I want an early access agreement. Give me 10 days. I'm the buyer, potential buyer. The seller, give me 10 days to go do my full do inspection, do inspections on the property, check out the roofs, the plumbing, electrical, walk all the units. So you're basically getting in there before the contract, is signed. And, some people might say, well, why would you do that when you don't have a signed contract? One reason might be just to get an early look. You want to know before you start going down the contract route and all that. You want to know whether or not the property has some surprises maybe you didn't know about. That could be a reason. You want to be, more competitive and just, there's a short timeline. This gives you the ability to finish your physical and typically your financial due diligence prior to the contract even being signed. Downside to it is that you're typically going to have some cost associated with it. So if you say, well, I went and I did my early due diligence and, I spent whatever, $15,000 and I found stuff and now I'm not going to go under contract. Okay. I mean, in reality, it's a drop in the bucket. So your contract should match your LOI. So, you submitted LOI. Don't go in there and start changing the agreed upon terms unless something just comes up, right? Now, a contract, which is also called a PSA, purchase and sale agreement, is going to have a lot more stuff in it than your LOI, like a ton. But, if you say I'm going to buy a property for $20 million on the LOI, and then the seller says, I'm good with that, and then you try to do a contract and you say, I'm going to buy the property for $19 million. I mean, what are you doing? I mean, that's just, we've had people do some really weird things that contradicted the LOI. And frankly, as a seller, it just ticks me off. So now there are other things, like I said, in the contract. or if something did change, it's fine, but don't change the agreed upon terms without some sort of legitimate reason to do so. I can't tell people are like, oh, I want the seller needs to sign the LOI, or the buyer is pushing, I really want a signed, LOI. It's like, okay, well, from fine, piece of paper. It's not legally binding, so you don't have a contract yet. It's just a letter of intent. So in some cases, it's almost like, who cares if the seller signs the LOI? Because like, oh, it shows commitment. No, it doesn't. I mean, it shows they signed their name on it. We've had deals before where we've had sellers sign an LOI that we submitted as a buyer, potential buyer, and then they completely renege and don't honor the LOI and go sell to somebody else because during that period of time, somebody gave them a higher offer. It happens. So I would just say, don't get hung up on the things that are irrelevant. A mental, emotional, relevant aspect to you doesn't necessarily, and myself too, right? Doesn't necessarily mean it's actually relevant to the transaction. So who cares if the seller signs it or not? Again, it's not binding. They can do whatever they want. Manual updates versus a new LOI. I mean, just you would be surprised maybe. You think everything's all, done online and redlined online, things like that. And, lots of times it is, but we've had version after version. We had a land actually. We had about five iterations back and forth. And, people were just on both sides were just like marking up the LOI with, a pen and manually writing things in. Like that's kind of pretty old school. Yeah, I mean it is, but sometimes people are like, well, at least I know I'm using the same LOI and the buyer or seller they're not sending me back an LOI where they change something to try to trick me and things like that. Now, at the end of the day, I'm always of the opinion I like having just a pure, clean LOI, no red lines, and then that way you get chance to review that. So, it doesn't matter, frankly, whether it's manual or redlined or however you do it, as long as it is accounted for and can be looked at. Give yourself room on price. So, to say, for example, it's a $10 million deal and you're like, the highest I'm going to go is 9.5. Absolutely. There's no question. I can't go higher than that. The deal doesn't work. Well, my opinion, don't offer 9.5. You're going to come in lower than that, whatever it might be. 9.1 gives you a little bit of room to come up. Get the broker guidance before submitting an offer. Just like, hey, where do you think offers are coming in? Can you let me know? They won't necessarily share. Some cases they will. Where the other offers are. But if you tell them, hey, I'm at 9.1. I know they want, 9.7. Am I even competitive? Should I submit? Should I, those type of conversations. And you get to know the brokers, you'll have good conversations around that and they'll give you good guidance. I mean, reality is they want to sell a property and make a commission, right? So give yourself enough time to close. I've seen even offers submitted to us to where I'm like, there's no way they can close in that timeline. Just, unless someone's paying cash, which, we've only had one cash sale out of like about 80 sales that we've done. So it's not very common. But assuming it's not, and then they're like, oh, well, I'm going to do, whatever, 10 days due diligence. And then we're going to do, I'm going to get the loan done in, 45 days. I mean, just knowing some of the timelines it takes to do loans, depending what type of loan it is, title, due diligence, just give yourself enough time, build in extensions in your LOI that will eventually end up in your contract as well. You're gonna have to pay for them typically. You're not gonna just get free extensions and just because you want to, you usually have to pay something to extend. So the more time you can get, the better. Now, if you don't end up, you know, using that time, fantastic. You don't have to put the money in. Generally speaking, too, when you put money in, additional money, you have to understand as a buyer, is that money being treated towards the purchase price? Meaning, I put 100 grand in. Does that count towards a purchase price of a $10 million deal? Or I'm putting 100 grand in to extend further, and now the deal is $10.1 million. So all I did in that case is put 100 grand in, but the selling prices went up $100,000. So be leery of that. Submit an LOI. A lot of people, everyone says this is a team sport. Some cases there are multiple people involved in the deal. My personal opinion is don't submit an LOI that has, let's say three of us and myself. We're all friends and partners, and we all have different, brands and companies, and we submitted an LOI, and we have all four of our names on there, and we have, four logos on there. I mean, as a seller, I'm looking at that going like, what is going on? Like, who are these guys? How do they know each other? Um, just very confusing. Who's the leader? Who's making decisions? Just don't do it. I mean, in some cases, who cares whose logo's on there? Who cares whose name's on there if you guys are all partnering up, right? Just one logo, one name. You decide how much extra you want to put in there, like whether it's your bios, your real estate own schedule. As a seller, you know, more basic information, the better, but not like, I've seen LOIs that are like, 10, 15 pages long. I mean, I don't, as a seller, what do I care about? Are you qualified? How much you paying? And what are the terms? All I care about. Gauge any, third parties prior to submitting offers, whether that's a lender or mortgage broker to help you with that, insurance broker, tax consultant, PM companies, things like that. Partners with others who have a track record. So if you don't have a track record yet, trying to buy a deal, partner with somebody else that's already been there, done that, has reputation in the marketplace, maybe has broker a relationship already with the brokers, and can talk to, you know, be presented as a, hey, this guy's done whatever, 20 deals, 2,000 units in 3 states, very active, bought in this particular area over the last year, bought two properties there, et cetera, right? Versus brand new guy to multifamily, zero experience, never closed a deal, you know. And then the other big thing is the seller always wants to know where's your equity coming from, right? So if you had the equity lined up, which isn't always the case and very rare, but if you did, you definitely want to put that in there on your submission of your LOI because it's going to be a huge advantage to you to the point where, a seller, including myself, would potentially accept a lower offer within reason with somebody that already had the money lined up. If you're on seller call, be prepared. You know, uh, don't ask the basic, simple questions like, how many units do you have? And, things that you should already know, either from, the offer memorandum, from your tour, things like that. I mean, just talking for the sake of talking just irrelevant, right? I mean, and you want to look prepared, like, oh, I don't remember this property. I looked at so many. Don't make statements like that. I mean, it's just like, are you even interested in the deal? Have you done your homework? They want to know your history, again, what you've done before, where you've done it, who you did it with, where's your money coming from, what are your loan options you're looking at, how much CapEx do you plan on putting in the property? You might sit there going, well, it's none of your business. I'm the buyer. I'll put whatever money I want in the property and I'll put it wherever I want in the property. Don't take that attitude. And if you think it's none of the business, well, the reason some cases sellers ask questions is because they want to know what you discovered. So, as an example, if I'm on a seller call and the seller says, well, how much money you putting in? Say, I'm going to put $2 million in the property, CapEx. Where are you going to do? Where are you going to put it? And I say, I'm going to put it into, whatever, exterior paint and interior CapEx. And the seller's sitting there in his mind thinking, I know it needs roof repairs and maybe replacements. The concrete needs to be redone some areas and, on the parking lot. Two, by the way, very, very big items. I know there's some plumbing issues. So they're just trying to find out where you're trying to put your money and are you allocating enough? And again, well, why would it matter? Well, if my $2 million I've allocated needs to be $3 million because of all the other stuff that the seller knows needs to be done on the property, the seller's gonna be thinking, hey, this guy Mark's gonna come in and he's gonna try to retrade after he goes under contract, right? Retrade, he's gonna do his due diligence and he's gonna find all these other things. He's gonna come back, try to lower his price. So that's why they're asking. Examples of contract issues could spend a ton of time just on contracts, and it is a critical document. Couple little words here and there can result in tens, hundreds of thousands, and maybe even millions of dollars of either benefit or detriment to you. So I've done, 200 plus contracts between the buy and sale side, learned a thing or two, been screwed a number of times, and now know what needs to go in, whether I'm a buyer or a seller, what needs to go in the contract. But we had one deal where it was getting tough with the lenders. Lenders are taking forever, and we were going to we were not going to close on time. And we already had $1 million down hard money with entitle. And the seller said, hey, if you miss the deadline, I'll give you another 15 days, but I'm going to increase the price $2 million. Like what? Like not increase just what money you need to put in for your earnest money. I'm going to increase the price of the property by $2 million. And you're like, I'm sorry, are you on crack? Anyways, that's a real example. Bank statements, if you're going to be buying a property, which is a business, you want to be able to validate and verify certain things like, okay, is the cash, the revenue, if you want to say coming in for rents. So rent roll says this guy's paying $1,200 and T12 shows, whatever, this amount of revenue and GL shows this much. And now what shows up in the bank? I can put whatever I want on Excel, what's going in the bank accounts. And that's what you want. You want to be able to validate that money is legit and is flowing there. RUBS examples, we've had examples where that's racial utility billing back system where you bill back for utilities. And we've had things where the seller was like, they're keeping all the money. I mean, end of the day, what you're trying to figure out is like, okay, I have the property potentially, going under contract. I have my underwriting that I did based on assumptions. I need to validate that all of the assumptions are correct, and if not, what if any impact financially to the deal, and what are all the potentially unknown things that I don't know about yet that could impact it. That you're trying to make sure your contract goes through all those items, and if for whatever reason there are certain things that can't be validated that you feel are necessary in order for you to close, then you want an out. You need to get out of the deal with as little to hopefully zero damage as possible. So you don't want to get locked in where you're like, oh, I have to buy this property or I have to sell the property because of the way the contract's written. And as silly as that sounds, there are two words, specific performance, usually more on the seller has to perform. They have to sell. If they go under contract and you as a buyer didn't default and the seller says, hey, I'm pulling this out, going to terminate the contract, I don't want to sell anymore. I'm not going to give you necessary legal advice, but I can tell you that seller is pretty much screwed. If they sign a contract that says they have to perform, which is specific performance, they have to perform. They have to sell you the property. If it goes down the legal route, they're going to be selling you the property. So I have an example on this where mentioned on the buy side, very unique, silly, let's say stupid thing that a partner did about 10 years ago. Wasn't involved in it, but he and I had an LLC together. He went under contract and there was specific performance for the buyer, which is pretty much unheard of. But he signed the contract. We didn't perform. I told him I'm not going to participate in the deal. The deal doesn't make sense. And we got sued. And I'm thinking like this is like a joke. Really? We're getting sued as a buyer? Like, what are you talking about, you know? And well, you know what? My little uh, it came into a big deal. We lost the lawsuit. It's not funny actually. I mean, at all. It's just like going from like this is ridiculous to like now we went to mediation and $371,000 out of pocket of my own money in order to fulfill they sold the property. What happened? They sold the property during because legal takes a long time, and they sold the property for $1 million less than what my partner offered on the deal. Well, that's because it was worth $1 million less. But that aside, so they came after it and sued us for $1 million, saying you guys had to perform as buyers. You didn't perform, and now we, the seller, suffered our damages are $1 million. So as strange and silly as that sounds, it's a legit example that we lost, and it all has to do with what's in the contract. If you don't know contracts inside and out, and I mean like inside and out, you need to. You need to have someone on your team that does. You can't rely just on attorneys either. I mean, they can help you, they can provide guidance, but a lot of these things are business terms too. It's as much of a business document as it is a legal document. So there's other things to be aware of, like transfer taxes. Some states have transfer taxes, who pays for it, and you have this concept of who customarily pays for it. And in Tennessee, for example, a buyer typically pays for it. We went under contract with actually an institutional seller. Transfer tax was we put in the contract that the seller has to pay for it. Seller signed, we signed. A couple weeks later, broker called and said, "Oh, there's a mistake in the contract. You guys have the seller paying for transfer taxes. Like, what's the mistake?" Well, that's not customary. Again, what's the mistake? You mean the mistake that the seller signed the contract? I mean, I don't really, I'm a little confused here, right? Your seller signed a contract. We, as the buyer, signed the contract that has a seller paying for transfer taxes. So I don't fail to see what the issue is here. Well, he was really upset, and the seller was really upset. And it's like, okay, and now there are other things around this that were negotiated after the fact, but the reality is like I'm sorry, too bad, so sad. I mean, I'm not trying to be a jerk about it, but whatever's customary or not in your mind in a certain part of the country is irrelevant to me when we have a signed contract with a buyer and a seller, both signing the contract saying the seller will pay transfer taxes. So, no, I mean, I don't have to pay. It was $85,000 in this case. Um, there are other things like, let's say you're buying a property. There are some cases the contract will say the buyer has to approve to move forward. So let's say you put money in, you go under contract, you have money with title, you have your earnest money, everything, and then there's like a certain amount of time that goes through. I've seen this in contracts where the buyer says they have to approve by a certain date that they're going to move forward or not. I'm like, what? Like, why? That's so basically that gives the seller an out, right? If the seller says, "Well, you didn't say you're moving forward," well, the deadlines for moving forward or not should be dictated 100% by the legit deadlines. Like, when did due diligence end? If we have a financing contingency, when does that end? When do we close? I mean, those are all legitimate, but to say the transaction doesn't move forward unless the buyer notifies me at some arbitrary date that they're moving forward is just absolutely ridiculous. And it's a way for a seller to again have an out if they want one. Insurance claim things down here. I mean, lots of properties we buy have had insurance claim, whether it's fire, and this one it was a stance where it's a winter storm, really bad winter storm in Texas, and there was verbiage in the PSA saying that the seller would take all the money from the insurance claim. And it's like, well, that's fine, provided all the stuff is fixed at the property, which it wasn't, by the way, and or we're getting some sort of credit to fix all the stuff that the winter storm caused the property. So these little, I mean, I stay sneaky. We've done the same thing. These little sneaky things, if you're not paying attention with, that could have been, a $300,000 turnaround where we're like, oh man, we just got screwed out $300,000. So again, there's no standard contract. Know your non-negotiables. Some things you're like, yeah, fine, I can live with that. Other things, like not being able to validate revenue and things like that. No, that's a big, big thing. Fighting over, in my mind, fighting over something that's really trivial, like it's a pride thing. It's like, oh, I want to win. I want to do that. You're buying a $20 million deal. This is an example. Like, a friend of mine, I partnered up with him. I guess it was probably 11, 12 years ago. And, he's fighting over, it's a multi-million dollar deal. It's fighting over $10,000 with the seller or something that's completely stupid, by the way. And end of the day, it's like, who really cares? Okay, I'm not saying you just like, concede and bend over and, let people, if you want to say screw you on a regular basis, but it's like at some point in time, these things are not even rounding errors. And if that's the thing standing between doing the deal or not, okay, you win. We'll concede on the $10,000, I mean, again, you have to use logic, common sense, and magnitude of how big of a, the money is in a situation compared to the deal. But don't make silly decisions because you're prideful. You wanna win. You want to screw the buyer. You want to screw the seller. Don't do that. Don't always try to solve the problem. What does that mean? I mean, of course you want to solve problems, but I've been cases before where it's like, okay, I present a problem. I'm a buyer, for example. Okay, well here's the problem, and I don't care how you solve it. Like you can tell me. I mean, I'm a reasonable, rational guy. I'm not gonna force you into one way of doing it, right? So, if something is like, well, hey, we can't provide whatever. If they say, hey, we can't provide bank statements, example, right? Like, okay, well, maybe there's another way to handle that, right? Maybe we can get deposits for certain tenants and but not full bank statements because they have other properties in there. There are ways to solve problems, typically, more than one way. And for you to say it has to be one way, I wouldn't do that, provided there are other alternatives that still meet your objective, right? I don't care how you solve the problem, Mr. or Mrs. Seller. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish, and you can let me know the different ways you think you can accomplish that, and then I'll pick one. Buyer sellers, wants more. I mean, whether that's just all these type of things that happen as you go, time goes on, things happen. You'll kind of see, transactions potentially go south quickly. Tips for contracts, PSA. General rule, the seller drafts the contract, but as a buyer, I prefer to have our attorney draft if I can. Say, hey, we're the buyer. We have PSA, standard template. More than happy to send it over to your review. Why would I want to do that? Because I know what's in it, and then, they will redline it and I'll see their changes and things like that. Have an attorney involved. Don't try to save a buck. I mean, we've done some transactions where, frankly, we have an attorney involved in the transaction, but, as far as sending the contract over, and things like that, no, we never, not, in some cases have not had a attorney involved, not because they don't add value, but they don't add value in this particular case. I mean, I've done 200 contracts and I know we have a standard template. And in some cases, like our, seller one is very seller friendly. And, I don't need someone to look at that. Now, I mean, I've done like 200 times. So, early on, yeah. And at some point too, right? You want to, you need an attorney to execute on the transaction, like working with title, working with the lender, legal team, stuff like that. So I'm not advocating to like just go off and do your own contract without an attorney. I'm just saying you get to a certain point, you've done enough of it, and you have a template. You can you can send over a contract to a broker and as your standard contract. Now there will be things that come up, most likely redlined and stuff like that you might want to involve your attorney on. In other cases, you're like, I don't need an attorney on that. So very, very important to have an attorney, but in some cases, we don't need them on certain aspects of a transaction. Know what's customary. I gave the transfer tax example. Again, that's customary, not that it's mandatory that it works that way. Who's paying for title? Who's deciding on the title company? So if we have a property, this varies by state and stuff like that. We have a property and I'm selling it, and the buyer says as a buyer, wants to pick the title company, but they want the seller, me, right, as a seller, to pay for the title policy. I'd be like, no, why do I do that? Like, why would I possibly pay for it, but then give you the ability to pick who you want for title? Doesn't work that way. Not for me, anyways. So, you might say, well, I don't really care what the title company is. You're in the business long enough and you do enough transactions, you're going to want a title company that you rely on over and over and over again. And the benefit to that is that you have some clout with them and they can do certain things quicker, faster, maybe more creative ways. So, all things being equal, I want to control title if I can. Rent ready credits. This is the one where, the vacant units that are vacant, will you get a credit for that if they're not in a make ready status where you can't rent them, is an example. This is the one where I had mentioned previous step 2 that I think you should walk all entire property, 100% of the property, 3-4 days before closing, and see how many units really are vacant. Because I mentioned before too, we've been screwed a number of times where 3-4 days before closing, seller says, "Oh, these are the units that are vacant on the rent roll." We go walk these 4 units. Yep, they're all good. They're good to rent out. No rent ready credit is an example, or maybe one it isn't, so you get a credit for $2,000. Close the deal. New PM comes on board. They walk 100% of the units. They find out another 15 units are vacant. Did the seller lie? Maybe. In a lot of cases, probably yes. Did they just not know? Could be. Maybe some people skipped. They didn't know it. But I can tell you examples after example where I know emphatically that the seller lied. So in order to avoid that, and people, you don't trust the seller? No, I don't. Why would I trust the seller? I mean, don't even know them probably. Certainly don't trust them. And why would I? Right? What have they done to earn my trust? So no, I don't trust them. I'm going to validate everything they say and revalidate it again. And I'm going to get my credits and my price reduction and things like that. I'm going to validate that and not rely just on what they're telling me. Everything that's in the contract is contractual. Outside of that, if seller and buyer have some sort of verbal discussion, it's totally meaningless. Whatever's in the contract is going to be what held up to. Now, if you have a verbal discussion and you want to follow up with a contract amendment, do that, which I would suggest you would do that if it's, material enough to where you need to do it. Don't rely on, people being truthful, honest, and having the recalling or remembering what happened, whether they're deliberately not remembering it or not, right? To be careful. Anything that is going to be changed that is of any significance to you in any form or fashion, get it documented and signed. Don't let a broker or seller push you to sign unless you're comfortable. Like, you're gonna lose this deal, Mark. You better sign this. It needs to be signed by today, or seller's going with a new buyer. Sign it today, right away. It's like, okay, well, we still have some questions and issues on that we need to, or my attorney's still reviewing a couple of points. Like, you need to just do it. You just need, like, well, I'm not going to do it. I'm not signing something that's comfortable with it. So if the seller needs to go find another buyer, so be it. Usually there is bluffing anyways, so, but don't sign it if you're not comfortable with it. Now, if you signed it and you have an out, meaning like an out that's basically no damages to you, you don't have to pay anything, okay, Maybe you being pushed into signing it. Okay, I'm going to sign it while you're still doing work on the back end, provided again you have an out. How will open insurance claims be handled? We run across this a lot. So, can an insurance claim, they say, oh, we're going to assign the insurance claim to you, the new buyer, and it's $450,000 of damage. Like, cool, great. I'm going to get that when we close or, shortly after when the insurance claim is paid. Well, what if the insurance claim is not paid for whatever reason? What if the insurance claim can't be assigned for whatever reason? So don't rely on that. If you want to say, okay, we'll do that, but we're going to hold $450,000 extra in title at closing. We're not going to give you that money. The seller's not going to get that money, but you'll get it when the insurance money claim comes in, right? Then we'll do it that way because you're depending. I mean, if it's like a $10,000 insurance claim, like okay, in a way, like kind of who cares, right? Rounding error. But if you're talking pretty significant numbers, you wanna do things like that. Don't miss wiring your earnest money. I mean, I don't know. You're buying a deal, right? In some cases, a multi-million-dollar deal. You don't know what date you have to send in things like your earnest money example, and then don't be like, "Oh, I'm at the bank at 4:30 to wire in the earnest money, and wires are cut off for the day, whatever it might be." Send it in a day or two early. Doesn't really matter if the deal doesn't go through, and all things being equal, you get that money back. So don't wait till the last minute to do that. Retrade sparingly. Retrade just means I go under contract for a price, $10 million. And then, under contract, I do some due diligence and I'm like, you know what? Oh my gosh, it has like, the property needs to be painted. And I go back to the seller and say, I want $100,000 credit. The property needs to be painted. Seller probably response should be like, seriously? Like when you toured the property, you didn't see that it needed to be painted. That's a silly request. I'm not going to give you $100,000 credit to paint the property. You should have already known that, which you should. I would argue that. Or the parking lot needs some work and I want a credit for that. You didn't see that when you toured the property? Now, difference. We're under due diligence. We scoped some plumbing lines during due diligence, and one of the lines on the property, which this has happened before, is collapsed, and it's $131,000 to fix it. And I want a credit for that. That's legit. I mean, the seller could still say, no, I'm not going to give you credit. You should have known that. And it's like, really? I should have known there was a collapsed plumbing pipe under your building? No. Same with roofs, in some cases, like you do roof inspections, now, if the seller disclosed something to you saying the building has a collapsed pipe, you knew that up front, right? But you're like, well, okay, whatever, we'll just deal with it. It's a pretty hard argument to go back and ask for a credit. Or if the seller says there are 10 buildings and two of the buildings need full roof replacements, and it's whatever, $90,000 to do that. And then you say, okay, you know all that stuff up front. Then you go under contract and then you go like, I want a $90,000 credit for those two roofs. Don't do that. You already knew about it. I mean, factor that in your price. You're coming back to retrade for things that were not disclosed to you, not known by you walking through or driving through the property, and they were unknowns, potentially, to even the seller, frankly, but definitely an unknown to you that there's no way you could have known about it. And the magnitude of them are significant enough to where you need to go ask for a credit. So all things being equal to, depending if it's not like a critical item, as a buyer, I would much rather get a credit and fix the stuff myself. And the reason for that is because if you say, hey, seller, you can either give me a credit or you fix it yourself, and they're like, well, we'll fix it ourselves, and they have, I'm trying to say like, incompetent person go and fix that because they can do it way cheaper. Now you're dealing with something maybe that was fixed, not up to snuff, and gonna have problems down the road. You don't know what they're doing. A lot of things outside your control. Lenders, for example, maybe like raising capital. So that's where, again, you always want to have those extensions in there. When you're closing a deal, you'll probably get well, more than one. Let's say more than one. And I think the most we've had, I think it was close to 70. I'm not kidding you when I say there's 70 settlement statements sent to us, over a week period of time. A little ridiculous, but you get your first settlement statement, you're like, woohoo, I'm getting, whatever. I only have to bring $2 million a deal. I thought I had to bring 2.8. And then you're like, you don't know enough yet. And then you get your next settlement statement. You're like, oh, they didn't have the attorney fees on there. They didn't have our, whatever, our fee to the broker, selling broker on there. And before you know it, like, oh my gosh. So bottom line, even if you get really, really close to the final settlement statement, and there's like, hey, you need $2 million, and you have like whatever, $2.5 million sitting in your bank. Within reason, you might say, well, I'm gonna send 2.5 million over to the title company. Like, oh my gosh, why would you send that money to them? What if they keep it and steal it and whatever? Okay, okay. I'm saying it's never happened in the history of the world, but definitely never happened to us. And the reality is, if you send over $2 million exactly, and then the day of closing, which can happen, no joke, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you get one that says, "Oh, you have to send 2.1 million. You have to send another $100,000 over. You only sent us $2 million earlier, and something came up that wasn't on there, the lender fees or whatever, and now you missed the cutoff to send it." Well, theoretically, the seller could say, "You're out of contract." And depending on how the contract's written, there's no cure for this, no cure period that I have to give you. I'm not going to sell to you anymore. They can do that. That's on you as the buyer, right? So send more, and you'll get it back when from title after the closing. But there are all kinds of things that show up during closing. Property tax is huge. If the property taxes haven't been appealed, you want the seller to start the appeal process. You want to put that in writing. If there's like a tax abatement thing going on, you want to know whether that's can be assigned to a new owner or not, a new entity or not. Which brings up a point. There's when you're buying a deal, I'm going to buy a deal and say the current owner is ABC Apartments LLC, and I say, well, I'm going to do a new LLC when I buy the property, which is what typically you would do. In fact, a lot of lenders will require you do that. But let's say they didn't. And you say, well, you know what? I'm going to actually just take over the current LLC from the seller. And the advantage of that is, hey, no reassessment of taxes, property taxes, right? No, no, they don't get reassessed. So property taxes stay way low. Okay, fine. But how about all the liability you could be inheriting in the LLC that you don't know? It's like, well, I have all the financials. I know what the payables are. You know, there shouldn't be any liens coming on. There shouldn't be any lawsuits coming on board. Shouldn't. And what happens? Totally different. And in fact, we had this situation where a partner of mine, again, a long time ago, had a deal. He had another partner in the deal. That partner wanted out, so we syndicated the deal to get his partner out. And lo and behold, the and we kept the same LLC, of course, because he already had the LLC and things like that. And his partner was out. And then lo and behold, after a couple months, I'm like, I think my partner is not really doing what he should do. He's a proper manager too. And in fact, I think he's doing some stuff he shouldn't be doing, which came came to be true. And we removed him after 2 months after taking over. Removed him as property manager, removed him as the manager of the entity, even though that was the entity he set up originally. We had a board, we were able to do that. Lo and behold, lien after lien after lien, lawsuits showing up. And he was essentially he was in collusion with some vendors. Unfortunately, stuff was not recorded on the books. And we were in a situation now, they're suing the LLC, right? Which that's what they should do. And we're in a situation now where, invoices were coming in. There was one vendor that I think sent in like 1,200 invoices, I kid you not, from like 9, 10 months before we even took over the property, before That's when they started. And there are a lot of rules around liens, when they can do them, when they can't, and when the last time they did work and all that. But that's what happened. The property, we're basically screwed. We had to pay off a bunch of stuff, and how we would. And one of them was like, the invoice would say we painted unit 303. Well, how would I possibly know 10 months later whether they painted a unit or not? There's no way I could argue that or dispute that. So very, very careful about taking over an LLC.